Let's see here. Oh, hey there, audit friends and family. Listen, auditors love asking questions, don't we? But are we actually good listeners? This week on Audit Bites, we're diving into a really hard truth. You see, many auditors think that they are great listeners. Auditory. But in reality, are we just waiting for our turn to talk? From interrupting to confirmation bias, we're here to break down the six biggest reasons auditors aren't as good at listening as we think we are. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to Audit Bites, the podcast that helps auditors become awesome. Join us for bite-sized info and education to excel in your auditing career.
All right, my friends, you've heard the topic, you've heard my question. Let me ask you a question. If you think you are a really good listener, drop an ear emoji into the chat. If you think that you are a really good listener, drop an ear emoji into the chat. And my man Clarence is here from Baltimore. Clarence, have you retired yet? Clarence is about to retire, you guys. Congratulations. Let's get Clarence a round of applause. Let's see some claps in the chat and all that other good stuff because that's a huge milestone in life to be able to work long enough to actually retire. Now, the question is, what are you going to do post retirement, Clarence? What are you going to do post retirement? At some point, man, we've got to meet in person. But let's get back to the topic at hand today. Auditors are trained to ask tough questions. But what if I told you that we are terrible at listening to the answers? Yeah, I said it. I said it. That's right. So before you fight me in the comments, let's be honest. How many times have you zoned out in a meeting and then you had to pretend like you knew what was going on? I can't be the only one. How many times has it happened? Think about it. You're sitting there taking notes and then somebody says something and then you're like, oh yeah, I totally agree with what Bob just said. What was that? What was that last part again that Bob just said? So be real. Have you ever been called out for not listening? If so, drop a thumbs up into the chat. Let me know that you've been there before, because we've all been there. Or if you think that you are the GOAT at listening, give me a thumbs down in the chat. Tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. I want to see how many thumbs downs we have. Because I'm watching you. I'm watching you. So don't sit here trying to answer your emails while you're listening to this podcast, because that means you're not really listening. Okay. In all seriousness, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. Today, what we're going to do is we're talking about, there we go. Today, we're going to break down 6 reasons why auditors struggle with listening. And more importantly, since it's only about a 30 to 45-minute show, a few tips on how to fix it. Because buckle up, because this one's going to hit close to home for some of you. 6 ways your listening skills are failing you and your auditors. And Clarence, Shri is saying congratulations on your retirement. Now, Shri is saying she's a good listener. She found the ear emoji and actually put it into the chat. Mark, hey man. Mark is here from Chicago, the Windy City. All right. So, 6 reasons your listening skills are failing you. And what would an Audit Bites episode be without story time? So let me tell you a little story. Now, this was years ago when I was first starting out as an auditor, and I thought I was absolutely crushing it at an exit conference. I was nodding like one of those bobblehead dolls while taking notes, making solid eye contact. And I was like, wow, look at me being all professional and everything. And then Mid-sentence, the client stopped talking, looked at me dead in my eyes, and said, "Are you even listening?" I had this shock on my face. Y'all, let me tell you, I panicked. My brain just froze, kind of like Windows when you kind of get that error in Windows. And so I had two choices. Right? I could lie, right? Or I could somehow find a way to Jedi mind trick my way out of this situation. So, what do you all think I did? I'm going to pause right there for a moment. We got about a 7-second delay here, but I'm going to pause. What do you think I did? Do you think I lied? Or do you think I Jedi mind tricked my way out of this? Now, you notice I didn't even give the third option, which was to tell the truth that I wasn't paying attention, right? That was an option, but I didn't even give that as an option. So what do you think I did? Do you think I lied, or do you think I tried to Jedi mind trick my way out of the situation? So let me just go ahead and tell you what I did. I decided to hit them with the classic. Of course I was listening. You were just talking about, and then I froze because I had no idea what they had said. Zero. None whatsoever. I had Olympic level zoned out at this point. And the worst part was they knew it. They looked at me and they could tell I had no idea what I was doing. However, they proceeded to let me awkwardly flail like a fish out of water. That's what they did. That ain't right. But what's worse is I just pretended like I knew what was going on. So listen, 6 ways your auditing skills are failing you and your auditors. That was the moment that I realized that listening isn't just hearing words, it's about absorbing what's being said. And that, my friends, is where a lot of us auditors struggle. So let's dig into those 6 reasons. But the first thing I'm going to do is tell you another story. Listen, I remember one time I walked into this audit convinced that the process was completely broken. Anybody ever been there before? You walk in and you just like, this area has been bad every year we've audited, so it's going to be bad this year too. I know I'm not the only one that's guilty of that, but that's what I was thinking. It was bad last year. It was bad the year before. So it's going to be bad this year. So when I walked in, I really wasn't looking to audit. I was just looking to verify what I already knew was wrong. And so here I am sitting here. I'm asking my questions. But here's the real deal. I wasn't listening. I was only picking up on the things that they said that matched what I already believed. And so every time they said something that supported my theory, I just kind of nodded like a detective while writing down my observations. And then at the end, my client dropped a real heavy truth bomb on me. They said, "Yeah, and we had been having this problem for the last several years, but we fixed it 6 months ago." I was like, 6 months ago? What do you mean 6 months ago? And see, what it really happened was my aha moment was ruined. And that's when I realized I wasn't really conducting an audit. I was looking for confirmation of what I already believed. Now, I know I'm not the only one. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. If you have ever gone into a meeting already convinced that you knew the answer, type guilty into the chat. Now, part of the reason I want you to type it in is because it makes me feel better about myself knowing that I'm not the only one. But on a serious note, it lets other auditors know that none of us are perfect and that we've all done these things before. So if you've ever done anything like this before, type guilty into the chat. So let everybody else know that none of us are perfect. Now, Mark is saying what he would have done is he would have done similar to me. He would have had a hallucination like AI. Yeah. Uh-oh. Yeah. It's hard to admit when you're not listening. It's hard to admit when you don't know what's going on. And I see Mark has typed guilty into the chat. Now, listen, if you guys don't know Mark is a seasoned audit professional. He's been doing this. Well, Mark, I won't give away your age. Mark's been doing this for quite some time. And if he's done it before, we all can be guilty of doing it at some point in time. That means even your chief audit executive, even your audit director, even your audit manager, even your senior auditor has been and can be guilty of doing this at various points in time. And so that leads us to our first reason that auditors are not good listeners. And that first reason is confirmation bias. You've all heard that term. But studies show that most of us tend to search for evidence that confirms what we already suspect. And we ignore contradicting details. There's some really nice studies in psychology today that tell us that confirmation bias is a real thing. We've all done it. We'll all do it at some point. We're not immune to it. It's not one of those things that you become cured of after you take a magic shot or after you take one of my great training courses. It's something that we have to make a conscious effort to do well consistently. So the question becomes, how in the world do you get over this thing called confirmation bias? So let's talk about that. How can auditors deal with confirmation bias? The first thing that we can do, very first thing that we can do, is pause before you react. The next time you hear something that contradicts your assumptions, don't dismiss it. Instead, try to pause. Just stop. Now, after you take that pause, look, before I go on, let me tell you guys what I do. Seriously, I have this internal dialogue with myself. Whenever I hear something and then you hear that thing that you don't like, you start to cringe because it probably shows up on your face. You know, you get one of those kind of looks. I consciously talk to myself. I'll tell myself, shut up. Some of you have probably heard me say this before on previous podcast episodes, but I will literally say, shut up, Robert, because now is not the time to talk. It's time to listen. So whatever you need to do, sometimes I'll pinch myself. Shut up, Robert. Whatever you need to do to make yourself shut up and listen, figure out what that thing is that works for you. Does anybody else have a technique that you use? If you have a technique that you use, drop it into the chat so other people can benefit from it. So the first thing you want to do is pause. Take a pause. After you take that pause, try to ask some neutral questions. So instead of asking your client, hey, is this process broken? This looks broken to me. You guys aren't doing what you're supposed to do, are you? Try and asking them what's working well and where are there potential gaps. If I could circumvent this process, how would I do it? It's another good question. So get yourself to be quiet, however you need to do that. And then ask a really good open question. Ask a really good open question. All right. Now, Mark is saying, wait, you know how I work? I have theories, either validate or not validate. So you have a hypothesis and search for evidence to disprove what you think could be true. That's another good way to do it. So I'm looking more for things to disprove what I think may be true. I actually use that technique sometimes because when you walk into something and if you already have a preconceived notion about it, if you can work to try to disprove what you already believe, now aren't you kind of working on the side of your clients? Think about it. If you're walking into an area and you already think that it's broken, but you're trying to disprove that, okay, what's working well here? You're going to find the things that are broken, but at the same time, you're going to find what's working well too. And that actually helps your client out as well. That gives them some valuable insight into their operations. So, how can you deal with confirmation bias? Pause before reacting. Ask neutral questions. Now, if confirmation bias wasn't bad enough, now since the pandemic, all of us are on Zoom calls with one another. So picture this. I'm in a virtual meeting and I'm taking notes, but I'm also answering email at the same time while also reviewing the previous year's audit findings. Because I'm a productivity machine. You guys see me. I'm all over LinkedIn, posting every day. I've got podcasts. I do training. I've got all this stuff going on. So I'm multitasking while sitting here talking to my client on Zoom. The client started talking, and then all of a sudden I hear my name, and so I freeze. So I'm like, oh, wait, my turn. So I said, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Hoping that they said something that I agreed with and hoping that it was something harmless. And then the client hits me with the worst possible question to follow up. They said, so what are your thoughts? Oops. Joke's on me again because I had no idea what they were just talking about. None. So I just panicked and nodded aggressively and then mumbled something like, great insights. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't do that this time because I learned my lesson from the first time. I fessed up, hey, you know what? I wasn't paying attention. I was checking my email. Can you repeat that? And I do apologize. When we aren't paying attention, we can always admit it. You look better admitting it than you do when you pretend as if you know what's going on. So that brings us to our second reason auditors are bad listeners. But before I tell you the second reason, have you ever faked it in a conversation? If you have, type fake into the chat for me. Have you ever faked it in a conversation? Acted like you knew what was going on when you really didn't. If you've ever faked it, type fake into the chat for me. Hey, there's no need to be embarrassed. I just told you my embarrassing story. The first one, I faked it and, well, it didn't turn out too well. The second one, I faked it and I fessed up to it. You get a better outcome, seriously. Just go ahead and face the reality. So the second reason auditors are not good listeners is, well, distractions and multitasking. Distractions and multitasking. Look, studies show how divided attention actually lowers our comprehension. And auditors, when we're juggling documentation and analysis and asking questions, that's going to make us struggle to be good active listeners. By the way, there is no such thing as multitasking. Scientific research has proven it. What they now theorize is that we do this thing called multiplexing, where we actually shut off one task and then focus our attention on the second task. Now, we can go back to the next task, but oftentimes we have to catch back up to where we were. So we don't think about two or three things at one time. We literally cut the switch off, jump to that second thing. Multitasking is not real, at least not long term. And trying it is not really effective. Trying it is not really effective. So now that begs the question then, if distractions and multitasking are causing auditors problems, what can we do to manage distractions and multitasking? I know you're asking yourself that question, so I'm glad you asked. Well, the first thing that we can do is give people our full attention. Single task conversations. That's what we need to have. Single task conversations. I know. We think that it makes us more productive when we can sit here and cook and talk to people at the same time while watching television, while also knitting a sweater, while also on the phone. I actually did that just recently. I'm guilty. I'm I'm real guilty of trying to do that sometimes. But here's the thing. I at least try to let the other people know, hey, I'm doing a couple things, so I might be a little distracted. So it's easier to get away with in your personal life. And I think it's more forgivable in our personal life too, because it helps us to kind of halfway be there if we tell the person that we're halfway there. I do that a lot. Professionally, though, if you know that your dog is in the backyard barking, you can tell people, look, my dog is going to be a little bit distracting. My significant other is out there trying to get the dog to be quiet. But you want to try to have single task conversations as much as you can. Give people your full, undivided attention. And if you fail to recognize what is being said, the second thing you want to do is repeat and clarify. Look, before moving on, restate what you heard and just say, just to be sure I understand what you're saying. And if you get it wrong, you can course correct before you get too far. I do this all the time in conversations because doggone it, I'm getting old and sometimes my memory is not that great. But I'll ask people, hey, listen, let me just tell you what I think I heard just to make sure we're on the same page. You know what? Now that I think about it, I was just having a conversation this morning and I was trying to repeat to somebody what I thought they had said. They got a little offended by it. And I said, hold on. I'm just trying to make sure that I have an understanding. I'm not saying that you've done anything wrong. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm on the right page with you right now. So at least let me finish what I think it is that I heard you say. Again, it's a whole lot easier in your personal life than it is to do at work. But we got to be able to admit when we're wrong at certain points. So, auditors, we try to be good listeners. Honestly, most of us humans are bad at it. One way that we can get better at it is to have single task conversations and then ask people to repeat what it is that they are saying. All right. If you're with me so far and you realize that most of us are bad listeners and we have to practice in order to get better at it and in order to keep being good at it, it takes continuous practice. Give me a thumbs up, give me a clapping emoji, anything. I can see them on LinkedIn when they pop up. But let me know that you're with me because we're going to keep moving on. When you think about auditors, we are very, very busy people. We have a lot of things to do. We're constantly juggling multiple projects, multiple people with multiple personalities. And then meeting after meeting, well, that gets exhausting. I remember one time I rushed from one client meeting to the next. And then in one meeting, I remember rushing clients through their answers because I had another meeting coming up right after. It was only later on, after checking my notes, that I realized I actually missed a crucial piece of information that completely changed the audit. You see, what happens is auditors often operate under tight deadlines, making us very impatient listeners. We oftentimes rush conversations, and rushed conversations lead to missing key details. Missing key details leads to eroding trust with our clients. So, this brings us to the third reason auditors are not good listeners, and that's time pressures. Think about the poor staff auditor listening who's juggling multiple projects right now, and their audit manager is telling them, we've got to finish this up. Think about the audit manager who's getting pressure from the director, or the director who's getting pressure from the chief audit executive. Time pressures make us not good listeners. So I know what you're thinking to yourself. How can auditors deal with time pressures during meetings, during audit engagements, or just dealing with their audit manager? Well, there are a couple of things that we can do. The first thing that we need to do is just slow down. And you can slow down to speed up, really. Listening properly from the beginning saves you time from follow ups later. Now, I know that sounds easy when you've got pressure from everybody, but in conversations, just think about the 3-second rule. Let silence work in your favor. You see, people tend to fill in silence with more detail. So if we ask a question to our audit clients and then sit back in silence, instead of trying to fill in that gap, they'll fill in with more information. Okay, so now we're about halfway through right now. So now that I've got you at this point, I want to ask you a question. What's the biggest reason you struggle with listening? Is it confirmation bias, distractions, time pressure, or is it something else? I just gave you my story of confirmation bias. I also told you my story with distractions. This is nothing to be embarrassed about. It just shows that you're human, unless you're not human and you're from a galaxy far, far away. Some people think that us auditors aren't human, but what's the biggest reason you struggle with listening? Drop it into the chat for me. Is it one? Drop a one into the chat if it's confirmation bias. Two, if it's distractions. Three, if it's time pressure. Or four, if it's something else all together. Because here's the thing, we are all in this thing together as auditors, and we have to learn from one another, which means we have to break down the walls of being embarrassed by certain things. We have to learn that certain topics we think are taboo, we need to discuss, like how some of us auditors are actually bad listeners. We ask really good questions, though, but sometimes we're just bad listeners. And that's okay because it shows that we are human, even though some of our clients think that we are aliens and from a whole nother planet altogether. Now, Mark is saying distractions. Multitasking is his major issue. Man, I'm so with you. Here's what's real funny though. While multitasking and distractions are kind of bad, sometimes you kind of have to try and do it at certain stages in your life. Let me give you an example. So right now, you're watching me do this podcast episode live because that's just how we do it. We don't record ours and then show it later. But what you don't realize is every time you hear a sound effect, that's me doing it. Every time you see a transition in the screen, that's me doing it. Every time you see me bring up a comment or remove a comment, that's me doing it. So I'm sitting here talking to you all, trying to get the points across and not forget anything, and occasionally glance at my notes, while also hitting sound effects at the same time, while also looking at the chat, trying to see if anything comes in that I need to pull up, while still keeping it engaging and entertaining. Whew. That's a hard job. But I will say, it's actually kind of made me a better auditor because it's helped me to focus in on what is most important at this particular moment in time. And if you've just joined us, I thank you for joining us on this episode of Audit Bites. We're not done yet. We're only about halfway through, but we're talking about 6 reasons that auditors are bad listeners. So let's move on. And I'm not going to tell you reason number 4 yet because guess why? I've got another story for you. Listen, auditors love reports. It's like they're the holy grail of auditing. They're not, though. Here's a tip. Your report is not your ultimate client deliverable. I know we act like it is, but the interactions that we have with our clients are more valuable than any report. With that said, I remember one time handing a report to a client that I thought was flawless. I mean, seriously, this thing was structured beautifully. Mwah! The findings were solid. The formatting, spectacular. I was feeling like an audit rock star. Then the client read the report, sighed, and said, "Did you even ask us about our challenges before you wrote this thing?" Imagine how I felt. I thought the report was a winning report. Turns out it just missed the mark altogether. Whew. So that one hurt. big time. It really hurt. So I realized that while my report was technically correct, it completely ignored the real world constraints that my clients were dealing with. You see, well, those audit findings might as well have been written by a robot. They were lifeless, no feeling in them whatsoever because, well, I didn't hear what they actually had to say. Now, speaking of sounding like a robot, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence nowadays. Have you heard about the best AI platform designed to help auditors plan smarter, analyze deeper, and communicate clearer? That's right, an AI platform just for auditors. And guess what? I created it. It's called Audit Leverage. With 5 powerful modules and over 15 tools, Audit Leverage helps you leverage, get it, artificial intelligence for better outcomes. You can do things like create a risk matrix in minutes, not hours. You can practice handling client objections to audit issues. You can even ask questions about the audit standards and get useful, practical answers. Does that sound interesting to anyone? If so, go to auditleverage.net. You can see a demo of some of the tools on the website. Okay. So now, LinkedIn user is saying, "Love this, Robert." Who is that? That is, I gotta cheat. That is Aisha. Aisha, you're showing up as LinkedIn user because of your privacy settings, and that's okay. But I have my phone down here where I can actually see who you are. So you see what I said about multitasking, most times it's actually not a good thing unless you're a podcast host and then you got to manage so many things at once. Okay. So let's go back to where we were talking about auditors loving our reports. You see, auditors are trained to focus on facts, but this can cause you to miss important social and contextual cues, which brings us to the fourth reason auditors are not good listeners. We have a technical focus over empathy. Again, we're trained to focus on facts. And so sometimes we might miss the bigger picture. Now, I know what you're thinking to yourself. How in the world can auditors deal with the technical focus over empathy problem? Let's talk about this because I have 2, maybe 3 suggestions for that. First and foremost, acknowledge before you analyze. We all know why we're here, and an audit is not a painless process. But before we start analyzing everything, acknowledge our clients, acknowledge them on several levels. First, acknowledge that they're just human beings, acknowledge that they have a full workload too. Acknowledge that they actually try to do their best at their job. Here's a novel concept. No one comes to work to do a bad job. Okay, most people don't come to work to do a bad job. So if we're thinking the worst of our clients to begin with, how do you think they're going to respond to us? For example, sometimes we find something and we just go all in. This is bad. This is horrible. This control failed. Instead of acknowledging, hey, I can see why finding this out must be frustrating to you all. Again, we're all humans here. The other thing that we can do after acknowledging before you analyze is ask about context, not just compliance. Now, don't get me wrong, compliance is important. But what is the underlying context behind why they're not in compliance? Because that's where the magic is. If we find out the context, maybe they've been struggling to get the resources that they need from their boss. So the real issue is not the one that you're looking at now. It's the fact that the boss is not giving them the resources that they need. So auditors, we focus on the technical, and that is important. Don't get me wrong. But the empathetic part is important too. We can tackle this by acknowledging before we analyze and then also asking about context, not just compliance. I can see a bunch of people going to steal that. But no, seriously. So Clarence even agrees. Clarence says, sometimes people just don't want to hear the truth. True. And that also means sometimes auditors don't want to hear the truth. Now, Clarence, when we get to that stage, oftentimes we have our cantankerous clients, right? Every once in a while, you're going to have clients that are just rude. But I'm here to tell you about 90% of our clients are okay. They're human beings. It's that other 10% that we really have to have special circumstances on how to deal with them. Okay. Okay. So look, I'm glad you joined me on this episode of Audit Bites, but we're not done yet. We're talking about 6 reasons why auditors aren't good listeners. And you know what? I've forgotten what reason we're on now, but we're going to move on to the next one. And for the next one, obviously, I'm going to tell another story. Look, years ago, I worked for this company and I had this former audit colleague. We're going to call him Dave. Now, Dave was one of the smartest auditors I'd ever worked with. I mean, this guy could break down an entire risk matrix faster than I could decide what I wanted for lunch. But the second we walked into a client meeting, it was like his battery drained to 2%. He would sit there dead silent while I carried the conversations. It's kind of like a dream team at this point, right? One person did the grunt work and then one person had the meeting. But if a client gave him a vague answer, instead of probing deeper, he'd just write it down like it was the gospel truth. Meanwhile, I'm over here wondering if I needed to check his pulse because, man, this dude was just kind of dead. So one day, I finally asked him, I was like, hey, look, Dave, man, why don't you jump in more during meetings? What's going on there? And he said, word for word, now this is what he said. He said, because the less I say, the less likely I am to say something dumb. All right, look, let's unpack this for a minute because I know for a fact that there's some introverts listening to this right now and you feel the same way and you just kind of felt that in your soul. So look, introverts, where are you? If you feel the same way, drop a smiley face into the chat so that other people can see that they are not alone. Because believe it or not, I'm not an introvert, but I'm actually not an extrovert either. I'm what they call an ambivert. I can deal well in front of crowds. That's why you see me on stage doing keynote speeches and stuff. But I swear to you, after it's over, I need a nap because I feel so drained. I'm not one of those people who's just always on. So, introverts, if you felt that in your soul where Dave said he just didn't want to feel like he was saying something stupid, let me know. Drop a smiley face into the chat. I want to see who all my introverts are. But with that said, that brings us to reason number 5 that auditors aren't good listeners. Reason number 5, auditors aren't good listeners, and that's introverted tendencies. If you think about it, we get stereotyped, sometimes unfairly, as being introverts. Sometimes we get unfairly stereotyped as being introverts. And so those introverted tendencies tend to make us not good listeners because we fail to ask follow-up questions. And so with that said, I know what you're thinking. How can auditors deal with introverted tendencies? All right. I'm sorry to break it to you, introverts, but the first thing you're going to have to do is break the silence barrier first. You got to do it. You got to start meetings with a simple icebreaker. You got to get to know people just a little bit. And really, it's like a switch. You have to turn it on and then turn it off when you leave these meetings, or take somebody else with you who will do all the talking, which is why I learned later Dave took me to meetings with him because we were Batman and Robin, although I'm not quite sure which was which. Was I Batman or was I Robin? Anyway, because he knew that I would ask those questions that needed to be asked after he did the research. But what if you were alone? So this is one thing that we have to learn how to do. We don't have to always switch it on, but we at least have to have it as a tool in our tool belt. Hey, I just noticed I did a full Batman tie-in there, and that wasn't even scripted. For those of you who know, you know. For those of you who don't like Batman or understand that reference, sorry, look it up. But no, seriously, start meetings with a simple icebreaker or start a conversation. Just getting one sentence out helps ease the pressure of speaking later. And the sooner you do it, the easier it becomes for you. So let's get to that second one. Use conversational listening. What do I mean by that? Instead of having robotic questions like, did this process fail? Say things like, tell me about a time this process didn't work as expected. Because now what's happened is you've kind of shifted the conversation into your client, because with the first question, they're just going to give you a yes or no answer. With the second question, they are now going to start talking. And this is conversational listening. It gets people to talking. Now, the next thing that you can do is commit to asking at least one follow up question. Don't take the first thing that they say as gospel truth. Now, I'm not saying attack them and challenge them, I'm saying truly be inquisitive. For example, if a client answers a question and that answer is too vague, you can respond with, can you walk me through an example? Or can you help me understand how this works in practice? It forces them to go deeper while keeping you engaged. But also, if you ask that one question here or there, you can then be quiet and you don't have to talk anymore. All right, people. So I'm glad you joined me on this episode of Audit Bites. We're talking about 6 reasons auditors are not good listeners. I think we were on reason number 5, which would mean next up is number 6. So let's talk about this. Auditors have to ask questions. It is simply a part of the job. Granted, it is a hard part of the job, and most of us, including me, are bad at it, and we have to practice to get better and better at it. That's why I wrote my best-selling book on how to ask better questions. Ask, get, perform. Ask better questions, get better answers, perform better audits. It's available on Amazon. But back to the podcast. Client meetings are very interesting. We can make or break our client relationships with our interactions with them. And so let me paint this picture for you. I once worked with this audit manager who loved to ask long, complicated questions. We'd walk into an audit meeting, and I swear the first question would be like, let me see if I can get this. I've got to take in a breath to get this one out. Can you explain the reconciliation process and how it works, particularly in cases where exceptions were identified, and also what internal controls were in place to prevent errors? And oh, yeah, how does this compare with the control 6 months ago? In the meantime, I'd be sitting there like, what just happened here? What in the world is going on? And the clients would be sitting there blinking uncontrollably, wondering if they should have maybe brought an attorney to the meeting with them. And then one time I witnessed this. What happened was the client, after a long pause, here's what they did. They took one part of the question and answered it and just let the other stuff go. You see, the other stuff was lost in the audit abyss forever. And my manager, instead of realizing what they had done, just got frustrated and later on said to me, I think they were trying to hide information. I'm thinking to myself, nah, man, they just couldn't process all that stuff you threw at them at one time. So now, let me ask you all, have you ever been on the receiving end of someone rattling off a 7-part question like this? Give me a thumbs up if you've ever been a part of a meeting where you saw, I see somebody on LinkedIn can relate to that. If you've ever been in a meeting where you saw someone ask a 7-part question like that. So that leads us to reason number 6 of why auditors aren't good listeners. You guys ready for reason number 6? You ready for reason number 6? A boss, my man, says, "Hey Rob, how you been? Man, I was worried about you. That's why I texted you the other day. I hadn't heard from you in a while, and I know you started the new job. I understand sometimes new jobs bring along a little bit of stress. So I was trying to do a pulse check, make sure you were still alive and weren't swamped and that you didn't need any help." Yeah, man. I'm doing good though, man. I'm doing good. I was worried more so about you than me. But I'm glad to know that you are all good. And I got your message. I'm going to send a message to that guy probably after I get off this podcast episode today. But I got your message. All right. So, again, let me know if you have ever been on the receiving end of someone who overloaded you with a ton of questions. Let me know if you have ever been on the receiving end of someone who tried to overload you with a bunch of questions. Okay. Oh man, you guys, this is crazy. When you do a podcast live, it's always interesting. I've got comments coming in on my control panel 2 and 3 different times, and I know that that's not what's happening. But the show must go on. Overloading questions is our 6th reason that auditors aren't good listeners. And I know what you're thinking. How can auditors deal with overloading questions? Let's get into it. The first thing you can do is quite simple. Ask one question at a time. That one is pretty self-explanatory, right? Ask one doggone question at a time. Short, clear questions lead to better responses. Short and clear questions lead to better responses. The next thing is simplify. Simplify. If a client ever asks you, "What do you mean?" you need to simplify. If someone asks you for clarification, it means your question is too complex. Break it down into bite-sized chunks. The next thing you can do is start broad. Start broad. And then let them guide you to wherever the conversation goes. This avoids overwhelming them. Now, every once in a while, you're going to have to steer them back in the right direction. But you don't just go in with your checklist. Do you have controls to make sure that we pay accounts payable vendors on time? Of course, they're going to say yes. Start broad. Can you talk to me about how you ensure clients are paid on time? And then they'll start talking about it. And then you can listen and you get a better understanding of the process. So start broad. Never mind. I was about to tell you what I call it, but that's in my book, what I call this technique. Anyway, I'm glad you joined me here on this episode. We're not quite done yet. We're close. If you are watching on YouTube, I can see that there are a few people over on YouTube. Go subscribe to the channel if you have not. Better yet, give the video a thumbs up. Leave a couple of comments on YouTube too. I know my YouTube channel looks crazy. I'm working on it. We're going to get it cleaned up. We also have a new website coming for you guys soon too, and a new newsletter. So go ahead to my website, subscribe to the newsletter. What I have coming in the next month is every week we're going to get some newsletter content going. Some of it's going to be video content, some of it written, but the whole website is being redesigned. The YouTube channel is for later on this year. We got to fix that because right now it just looks like trash, and I know it does, but go and subscribe to it anyway. Also, if you are at an IIA chapter or you work for a company and you need some good audit training, let's talk. I specialize in soft skills training, but I also have technical skills training. And also the biggest training now is on artificial intelligence. Look, let me tell you, I'm just going to be real honest with you. You got a lot of auditors out here doing training courses on artificial intelligence. I'm not trying to knock any of them, but why would you not talk to the person who literally built an AI platform for auditors? So what that means is I have a startup company that I built. And when I say I built it, I did a lot of the programming for the software that you all are using. Abbas, you've used Audit Leverage. Tell the people what you think about Audit Leverage. Anyway, if you want to be trained on AI and how to use it, but also how to audit it, why would you not go to the auditor with practical experience in doing just that, developing an AI platform? See, I'm trying to see if auditors are good listeners now. So if you need audit training, you know where to go. Now, Clarence, let's go back to the audience. Clarence says, I don't mind questions because when they ask one, I will ask them one. Clarence, I know you're not shy though. See, some people are actually real shy. And I know you're not afraid to ask questions. Neither am I, but there are some people who are really, 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 really shy. Clarence says sometimes when you ask people questions, they'll try to change the subject. I know that's the worst, but you gotta steer them back in the right direction. And he's responding to when I said you got to start broad, because when you start broad, they'll give you information. They will try to change the subject, but then sometimes you just let people talk a little bit and then you kind of steer them back into the right direction. And Abbas is saying Audit Leverage is amazing. So here's what I will say. Audit Leverage is designed in two ways. You can either purchase it as an individual for an annual subscription, or your company can buy it for your entire department. We got a good price point for individual auditors as well as for entire departments. But honestly, it's the best thing I've seen out there. We don't do this whole thing where we try to help you rewrite your audit issues. Okay, anybody can do that in ChatGPT. So I want to say thank you all for joining me on this episode of Audit Bites. You realize it's episode number 70? You see that there? Episode number 70. A lot of auditors hear but don't listen. 6 ways your listening skills are failing you and your audits. I have an ask for you. If you like this episode, refer it to your friends. Refer it to them on YouTube, though, so we can get those YouTube views up. We'll be running replays on LinkedIn, too. But if you have, here's a secret. If you work with an auditor that you know is not a good listener, say, hey, man, I saw this really good podcast episode. Check it out. That's your subtle way of letting them know until they hear me say this at the end. Oops, I may have just spoiled that. But no, seriously, I want to say thank you guys who listen. When we upload this and it's distributed on podcasting platforms, we have listeners in so many countries that I never thought people would actually listen to little old me in. I mean, I'm just amazed. We got people in the United Arab Emirates, in Oman, in France, China, Japan, of course, the US, Australia, Singapore, just everywhere, Central and South America, Canada. I'm just completely amazed and also thankful at the same time. Oh, by the way, the next episode, for those of you who are still listening, the next episode, you're going to want to stick around for it. It's going to be in 2 weeks. I try to do this every other week. The next episode is going to be titled, Is Internal Audit? You know what? I probably shouldn't give it away, because you know what? Sometimes when I give away the episode titles, people will hear them and then start trying to post about it on LinkedIn. I know you're listening. You know what? I'm going to give it away anyway because I don't care. Okay. The next one is going to be, is internal audit too focused on compliance and not enough on business strategy? You're going to like this one. Is internal audit too focused on compliance and not enough on business strategy? Does that sound like a really good episode? Let me know. I know I'm going to get some emails and text messages. And in the meantime, thank you for joining me. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for watching this episode of Audit Bites. If you receive value from this podcast, do us a favor. First, tell other auditors. Second, give us a 5-star review. And finally, talk to Robert about training your auditors. Our contact information is on our website, www.thatauditguy.com. It's also where you will find our course catalog, on-demand courses, a kickbutt.
Oh, sorry. I ended it too early. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.